There are voices which time ought to silence, and yet I have heard one return from the grave. In all my years beside Sherlock Holmes, few matters disturbed me more than the death of Sir Julian Markham. His physicians certified it. His household mourned it. His funeral passed beneath cold November skies. And still 3 nights later, a letter arrived in Bloomsbury, bearing the dead man's own hand, sealed, recent, and carrying a warning that drew Holmes and me once more into the fog of London. It is a curious truth that London wears grief differently from the countryside. In the villages and market towns of England, mourning sits openly upon a household, curtains are up. Neighbours speak in lowered voices, bells toll with solemn certainty, and sorrow, like weather, is permitted to show itself plainly. London, however, possesses no such tenderness. The city absorbs grief, as the Thames absorbs rain. A man may bury his father in the morning, and by evening find himself pressed shoulder to shoulder with laughing strangers beneath the gas lamps of Piccadilly. Omnibuses continue their rattling progress. Clerks hurry towards trains. Shopkeepers haggle. Newspapers shout scandal. And Parliament, death, in London, is rarely granted the dignity of interruption. It was upon such an evening, damp and wind-stirred, that the affair of Sir Julian Markham first entered Baker Street. The rain had begun shortly after dusk. Holmes and I sat within our familiar sitting-room at 21B, where the fire burned low and the windows carried long silver trails of water down their panes. I had been engaged in the admirable but largely unsuccessful task of persuading Holmes to take nourishment. He had spent the greater portion of the day stretched upon the sofa, fingers joined beneath his chin, alternately smoking and staring at the ceiling, with an expression suggesting that London itself had somehow disappointed him. "You neglect your dinner again," I remarked. "My dear Watson," said he, without moving, "I neglect only those activities which fail to improve the mind. You would improve yours considerably with a chopped potatoes, a temporary illusion. You cannot subsist indefinitely upon tobacco." Holmes opened one eye. I have done so before." "And nearly poisoned yourself." "A risk," he replied, "which civilization occasionally demands." I was preparing a suitably medical rebuke when Mrs. Hudson ascended the stair and knocked. Her knock possessed, after many years of acquaintance, a vocabulary of its own. This particular one conveyed irritation, restrained by duty. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes did not stir. "If he is selling encyclopedias, tell him I have embraced ignorance." "He is not selling anything, sir." There followed the slightest hesitation. "And," she added, "I do not think the poor gentleman is very well." Holmes sat upright at once. "Show him in." The visitor who entered was a man of perhaps 50 years, spare of frame, and carefully dressed, though the care had plainly failed him that evening. His overcoat was rain-darkened, his collar imperfectly fastened, and there hung about him the unmistakable appearance of one who had not slept properly in several nights. He carried gloves in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. What struck me most, however, was not exhaustion, but apprehension. His eyes moved restlessly about the room, lingering upon the windows, and finally upon the fire, as though seeking reassurance that ordinary things still existed. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said. Holmes motioned toward the chair opposite. "You have the advantage of me, sir. My name is Edwin Harbury." He sat only after evident effort. "Solicitor, Lincoln's Inn." Holmes inclined his head. "And your difficulty?" Harbury looked down at the envelope in his hand. For several moments he seemed unable to speak. At length said quietly, "I have come concerning Sir Julian Markham." Holmes's expression altered slightly. The name was not unfamiliar. Sir Julian Markham had served many years upon the magistrate's bench, and enjoyed a reputation for firmness, bordering, according to some critics, upon severity. His death, reported 4 days earlier, had received modest notice in the newspapers. "Sir Julian is deceased," Holmes observed. "That," said Harbury, "is precisely the matter." He extended the envelope. Holmes accepted it without haste. I confess that even before it was opened, the thing disturbed me. It bore the wear of recent travel. The seal had been broken and resealed, and upon its face, written in a strong, deliberate hand, appeared the words, "Mr. Edwin Harbury, Lincoln's Inn, London." Holmes turned toward the lamp. "You have examined the postmark?" "Yes. And?" "It was stamped last evening." Holmes glanced upward. "I see." Harbury swallowed. "Sir Julian Markham was buried 3 days ago, Mr. Holmes." The fire gave a small settling sound. Outside, rain whispered against Baker Street. Holmes drew the letter free and unfolded it. As his eyes moved across the page, I observed something rare indeed. For the briefest instant, Sherlock Holmes looked surprised. Then he handed the sheet, silently, to me. The writing was unmistakably firm and deliberate, and beneath it stood a signature already committed to the grave. I read, "Harbury, do not trust Ashdown. The truth was buried before I burn this, and come alone, Julian Markham. And though I am not by nature a superstitious man, I remember distinctly that the room felt colder after I had finished reading." For some moments after I had laid down the letter, neither Holmes nor our visitor spoke. The rain continued softly against the windows of Baker Street, and somewhere below us a hansom rattled past toward Marylebone Road. Yet within our sitting-room there settled that peculiar stillness which I had learned to associate with the opening movement of a serious case. Holmes had returned to his chair. The sheet lay across his long fingers, while his eyes, half-narrowed beneath the lamp glow, examined not the words themselves, but the thing entire, as a botanist examines not a flower, but the soil from which it springs. Mr. Harbury sat rigid. He watched Holmes with an expression composed equally of hope and dread. At length Holmes spoke. "You are certain," said he, "that this hand belongs to Sir Julian Markham?" Harbury answered at once. "As certain as I am of my own, Mr. Holmes. You knew him intimately for 20 years. I drafted his legal papers, managed portions of his estate, and conducted his affairs after Lady Markham's death." Holmes inclined his head. And you have no doubt? None. Holmes passed the letter beneath the lamp. Watson? I took it again. The handwriting was firm, deliberate, and entirely free from tremor. Though I had never seen Sir Julian's correspondence, it carried precisely that judicial confidence one imagines in a man long accustomed to signing warrants and pronouncing sentences. What strikes you? Holmes asked. The hand appears steady, I replied. Certainly not the work of an Ivanet. Just so. Harbury leaned forward. Miss Holmes, you do not suppose... He faltered. Holmes spared him. That Sir Julian rose from his grave to trouble the London postal service, said he mildly. No. The dead are capable of many inconveniences, Miss Harbury, but I've yet to find them dependable correspondents. The solicitor attempted a weak smile, and failed. Holmes continued. When did this arrive? This morning. 9 o'clock. Delivery. And you came directly here? Within the hour? You told no one? No one. Holmes nodded approvingly. An excellent beginning. He rose and crossed to the chemical corner, near the window. I observed a familiar quickening in him, which always accompanied intellectual pursuit. The languor of earlier hours had entirely vanished. He moved now with the quiet precision of a hound upon scent. From a drawer he withdrew a magnifying lens, and several small instruments, whose purpose remained obscure even after years of friendship. The envelope, if you please. Harbury surrendered it. Holmes examined first the seal. Broken and resealed, said he. Yes, I confess I opened it before coming. Naturally. Holmes studied the gum. Not by you, Harbury blinked. I beg your pardon. This was opened once before. It reached your hand. The solicitor stared. That is impossible. My dear sir, it is already accomplished, and therefore cannot reasonably be impossible. He angled the envelope toward the lamp. Observe, Watson, 2 seal impressions. The lower older, the upper imperfect, and later applied. I stepped nearer, and saw at once that he was correct. Harbury swallowed. You mean someone tampered with it? Almost certainly. Holmes now examined the postmark. Charing Cross sorting office, he murmured. Yesterday evening, 7:40. He turned suddenly. The funeral. Describe it. Harbury appeared momentarily bewildered by the abrupt transition. It was held 3 days ago. St. Jude's Church, Hampstead. Large attendance? Perhaps 60. Family. A niece, Miss Eleanor Markham. Some distant relations. Household servants. At the death itself, Harbury hesitated. Heart failure. Certified by whom? Dr. Lionel Ashdown. Holmes looked up. The movement was slight, yet I knew that name had struck him. Ashdown, said he quietly. The gentleman whom Sir Julian instructs us not to trust. Harbury shifted uneasily. Yes. Who is he? Sir Julian's physician. A Harley Street man of considerable reputation. Holmes said nothing for several seconds. Then, and Sir Julian died where? At Markham House in Bloomsbury. Under what circumstances? Harbury removed his spectacles and polished them with nervous fingers. He had not been well for some weeks. Fatigue, breathlessness. Ashdown attended him regularly. On the evening of the 8th, The servants report he retired early. By morning, he was found dead in bed. No disturbance, none. No final message, nothing whatsoever. Holmes turned back toward the fire. Curious. Harbury looked almost offended. Curious, Mr. Holmes. The man is dead. Precisely, said Holmes. He held up the letter, and yet remains unexpectedly conversational. The room fell silent again. Holmes stood gazing into the flames. I knew that posture well. His mind was assembling, not solving, never that, but arranging. At last he spoke without turning. Mr. Harbury, who benefits from Sir Julian's death. The solicitor looked startled. I had not considered. Then I begin now. Harbury hesitated. The estate passes principally to Miss Julian Markham, a considerable estate, very, and Dr. Ashdown. The solicitor frowned. Ashdown? I do not follow. Holmes's eyes remained upon the fire. Perhaps, said he quietly. We soon shall. Then he turned sharply toward me. Watson, pack an overnight bag. You mean to visit Bloomsbury? I mean, said Holmes, taking up the letter once more, to call upon a dead magistrate whose handwriting appears more active than his pulse. There are certain London houses which seem to preserve not merely the furniture and habits of their owners, but something for their temper also. Markham House in Bloomsbury struck me at once as such a place. We reached it shortly after 9 that same evening. The rain had diminished to a fine drifting mist, and the lamps along Russell Square burned through it like distant embers. Holmes and I had taken a hansom from Baker Street, accompanied by Miss Harbury, who throughout the journey sat in visible agitation, clasping his gloves so tightly that I feared the seams might give way. Markham House stood upon a quiet terrace of Georgian residences, sober and dignified in appearance, its pale stone frontage darkened by weather and age. Only 2 windows were lit, one upon the ground floor, the other above. As our cab drew to a halt, Holmes remained seated for a moment, studying the facade with unusual attention. What do you see? I asked. A household that has not yet settled after death. You infer that from the windows? Partly. Also from the curtain upon the upper floor, which has been repeatedly moved in the hour, and from the servants' entrance, where muddy prints indicate 3 departures and only 2 returns. Harbury stared. You cannot possibly know, my dear sir, Holmes replied, stepping down. I rarely know anything else. The door was opened by an elderly butler, whose expression suggested long practice in the management of grief, and unwelcome callers alike. His name, we learned, was Mercer. At sight of Harbury, however, his composure faltered. Mr. Harbury, sir, I had not expected. We must see Miss Markham, said the solicitor quietly. At once, the butler hesitated. She is receiving no visitors this evening. Holmes removed his gloves. Then we are fortunate, Mr. Mercer, sir. Fortunate, Mr. Mercer, that we are not visitors. The old man looked uncertainly between us. And who, sir, may you be? Sherlock Holmes. I have witnessed many reactions to Holmes's name over the years. Curiosity, relief, occasionally annoyance. Mercer's was nearer apprehension. Something flickered behind the man's eyes and vanished almost instantly. I see, said he. Holmes, who misses very little, saw it too. You were aware of me already. A household hears things, Mr. Holmes. I dare say, Mercer admitted us. The hall beyond possessed that subdued solemnity common to houses recently visited by death. Lamps were lowered. Voices, where heard at all, were careful and subdued. A faint scent of lilies lingered in the air. Our coats had scarcely been taken when footsteps sounded above. A young lady descended the staircase. She was perhaps 26, dressed entirely in black, and carried herself with a composure which struck me as less natural than disciplined. Her face was pale, but handsome, and though grief had plainly touched it, there remained in her bearing a firmness almost judicial. "Mr. Harbury," she said. Then her gaze moved toward Holmes. "And these gentlemen?" Harbury cleared his throat. "Miss Eleanor Markham. This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson." For the briefest instant, her expression altered. Not surprise, recognition. "You have come about the letter," she said. Holmes regarded her closely. "You expected us." "I expected," said she quietly, "that someone eventually would." Holmes removed the envelope from his pocket. "You know of this?" Her eyes fell upon it. "I know it exists." The butler shifted uneasily near the doorway. Holmes noticed. "You have seen it before, Miss Markham?" "No, but you are unsurprised." She hesitated. "My uncle was not a man who left matters unfinished." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "And yet," said he, "the law and medicine appear to believe he did precisely that." A faint shadow crossed her face. "You've even for my uncle did not write it." "I think nothing yet." She drew a slow breath. "Then perhaps," said she, "you should see his room." The request seemed to disturb Mercer. "Miss Markham," she turned, "that will be all, Mercer." The butler lowered his eyes. "As you wish, miss." We followed her upstairs. The corridor above was dimly lit and unusually cold. As we walked, Holmes allowed his fingers to brush lightly against the banister and wall moulding in that absent manner which, with him, concealed very deliberate observation. "Your uncle died 3 nights ago?" he asked. "Yes." "And this room has remained untouched?" "Exactly as it was." She paused before a door. "My uncle disliked disturbance." Holmes glanced toward the handle. "And who discovered him?" "I did." Her hand rested upon the latch. "He had not rung for breakfast. That alone was unlike him." There followed the briefest silence. Then she opened the door. The chamber beyond was spacious and orderly. A fire had burned low in the grate. Heavy curtains framed tall windows, overlooking the square. And there, beside the bed, where Sir Julian Markham had breathed his last, Holmes stopped. Upon a small writing desk, near the window, stood an inkstand, several neatly arranged papers, and a second envelope. The room seemed suddenly very still. Holmes crossed toward it, without speaking. The envelope bore no address, only 3 words written across its face, in the same firm hand we had already seen, for Mr. Holmes. I confess that for several moments no one in that chamber moved. The sight of the envelope affected us each differently. Miss Markham drew a slow breath, and remained near the doorway, one hand still resting lightly upon the latch. Harbury gave a visible start, and removed his spectacles, As though doubting the evidence of his own eyes, Holmes alone betrayed no outward astonishment. Yet I knew him well enough to perceive the slight sharpening about his gaze, which marked the instant when mere curiosity becomes genuine engagement. He approached the desk without haste. "Pray," said he quietly, "touch nothing." The room itself bore the curious atmosphere of a life interrupted, rather than concluded. Sir Julian had evidently been a man of method. The books upon the shelves stood in precise alignment. A silver-backed brush and shaving things rested upon a washstand with military exactness. Upon the mantel stood a carriage clock, whose steady ticking seemed, in his silence, unusually loud. Holmes paused beside the writing table. The envelope remained where it lay, cream paper, heavy stock, and across it, written in a firm, judicial hand, unmistakably matching the earlier letter, for Mr. Holmes, Harbury, swallowed audibly. "Good God!" Holmes bent nearer. "You observed this before, Miss Markham?" "No." "You are certain?" She nodded. "The room has remained closed since the funeral. Only Mercer and I possess keys." Holmes glanced toward the door. "Locked continuously?" "Yes." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he crouched slightly and examined the surface of the desk with the aid of his lens. The lamp cast a warm circle across the polished wood. At length he said, "Interesting." "What is it?" I asked. "The envelope has not long been placed here." Harbury stared. "How can you know that?" Holmes pointed. "The dust." I looked more carefully. The desk carried the faint grey film, inevitable in rooms closed several days. Yet, beneath the envelope, there remained a clean rectangle, where the wood showed darker and brighter. Holmes touched the surrounding dust lightly. "This paper displaced older dust when set down," said he. "Observe further, there are no settled particles upon the upper surface." "You mean that it has not been lying here since Sir Julian's death?" Miss Markham looked suddenly pale. "But that is impossible." "My dear madam," Holmes replied gently, "the word grows less persuasive with repetition." He examined the seal. Unlike the previous letter, this one remained unbroken, and upon the wax there appeared impressed a device of curious design. Holmes leaned closer. "A stag beneath a crown," said he softly. Harbury nodded. "The Markham crest." "Indeed." He straightened. "Who entered this room today?" "No one," said Miss Markham at once. "No servants?" "None." "No physician?" Her hesitation was almost imperceptible. "Dr. Ashdown called this afternoon." Holmes turned. Was he admitted here?" "He wished to retrieve certain medical notes." "You allowed it?" "For only a few minutes." Holmes said nothing, yet something in his expression changed. The name had returned. Ashdown, the physician whom the dead man had warned against. Harbury shifted uneasily. "Surely you do not suggest—" "I suggest nothing yet." Holmes lifted the envelope delicately between finger and thumb. I noticed then that he did not open it. Instead, he carried it toward the firelight. "Watson?" "Yes." "Observe the seal." I joined him. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, The wax has been warmed. Precisely. The edge nearest fold showed the faintest distortion. Opened, possibly, and resealed again. Holmes nodded. Most competently. Miss Markham looked bewildered. But why address it to you? That, said Holmes, is the first sensible question of the evening. He turned the envelope over once more. Then, with extreme care, broke the seal. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. Inside lay a single folded sheet. Holmes unfolded it. His eyes moved rapidly across the contents. And then something occurred which, even now, remains vivid in my memory. Sherlock Holmes frowned, not theatrically, not with confusion, but with the unmistakable displeasure of a man encountering something he does not at once understand. "Holmes?" I said. Without speaking, he handed the paper to me. The handwriting was again unmistakable, and the message ran thus: "Mr. Holmes, if this reaches you, then events have proceeded as I feared. You will naturally suspect deception, and you will be correct. Yet deception of what kind is another matter entirely. Trust neither appearances nor certificates. One man in this house serves two masters. Another fears the truth more than guilt itself. You must not question Dr. Ashdown until you have first examined the blue ledger. It is hidden where the rain cannot reach. You have 3 days. After that, the second burial will begin. Julian Markham." I lowered the page. The fire cracked softly. No one spoke. Then Harbury whispered, "Second burial?" Holmes had turned toward the window. His face, reflected faintly in the dark glass, wore that distant expression I knew so well. At length he said, "Miss Markham, I should very much like to meet Dr. Ashdown." And before she could answer, there came from somewhere below us the sudden sound of a door slamming violently shut. The sound below us echoed sharply through the house. Miss Markham started. Harbury half rose from his chair. Only Holmes remained perfectly still. "A front door," said he quietly, "closed with haste rather than anger." Another sound followed. Voices, one of them Mercer's, the other deeper and unfamiliar. Holmes tilted his head slightly, listening with that peculiar concentration which made him seem for the moment less man than an instrument tuned to hidden vibrations. "Interesting," he murmured. "You recognize him?" I asked. "No, but he walks with confidence and removes his gloves while speaking. A man accustomed to entering sick rooms." Miss Markham looked toward the corridor. "Dr. Ashdown." The footsteps began ascending, measured, unhurried, yet beneath their steadiness I fancied there lay an impatience imperfectly concealed. Holmes took the letter gently from my hand and folded it once more. "You will say nothing of this second message," said he softly. Harbury blinked. "But surely—" "Nothing," Holmes repeated. The solicitor subsided. A moment later, the figure appeared at the doorway. Lionel Ashdown was perhaps 50 years of age, tall and spare, with iron-grey hair brushed carefully back from a thoughtful forehead. His attire was immaculate, despite the weather, and he carried himself with the easy assurance of a man long accustomed to authority. What struck me first, however, was not confidence, but composure. Some men wear composure like dignity. Ashdown wore it, like armour. He paused upon seeing strangers. "Eleanor," he said, "I was informed visitors had arrived." His voice was cultivated and pleasant. Miss Markham answered with evident restraint. "Dr. Ashdown, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and Dr. Watson." A curious thing occurred. Not surprise, not alarm, only the faintest pause. Then he inclined his head. Indeed, Holmes stepped forward. "Dr. Ashdown, I know your reputation, Mr. Holmes. I trust it survives acquaintance." Ashdown smiled politely. "I should hope mine does also." His eyes moved briefly about the room, not wandering, searching. The glance lasted scarcely longer than a breath, yet Holmes saw it. So did I. And when the physician's gaze reached the writing desk, I observed something else. Disappointment, so slight that another man might have missed it, but not Holmes. "You called this afternoon?" Holmes asked. "I did." "For medical notes?" "Yes." "You found them?" "Without difficulty." Holmes folded his hands. "And you were alone here for perhaps 5 minutes? No longer?" "No." The doctor removed his gloves. His movements were uncommonly neat. "There is some difficulty, I gather." Holmes regarded him. "Sir Julian's death interests me." Ashdown's expression remained unchanged. A natural death rarely attracts investigators, and yet sometimes, Holmes replied mildly. Nature receives assistance. A faint silence followed. Miss Markham looked troubled, Harbury distinctly uncomfortable. Ashdown, however, merely studied Holmes with professional calm. "You question my certificate. I question everything." "As is your habit, I believe." "As is yours." The physician smiled. "My habit is medicine, and Sir Julian suffered from cardiac weakness, fatigue, periodic angina." "For how long?" "Several months." "You attended him regularly?" "Twice weekly." Holmes moved slowly toward the hearth. "A painful decline?" "At times." "And death? Peaceful?" Holmes stopped. "Entirely peaceful." Ashdown met his gaze. "Yes." The fire crackled softly. I had seen Holmes conduct examinations before, sometimes aggressive, sometimes deceptively idle. This was neither. He circled the physician, the way one circles an unfamiliar mechanism, testing balance, observing strain. "Forgive the bluntness," said Holmes, "but death often leaves traces invisible to affection." "I assure you," Ashdown answered, "I am governed by evidence, not sentiment." "Admirable." Holmes gestured toward the chamber. "No struggle?" "None." "No convulsions?" "No." "No suspicion of poison?" Ashdown's face remained unreadable. "Certainly not." Holmes nodded. Then, "And yet you revisited the room today." The physician's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "For my notes?" "Quite." Must towards them moved toward the desk. "You will forgive my curiosity. Physicians are not usually sentimental archivists. I prefer complete records. A commendable habit." Ashdown replaced his gloves with measured care. "And what precisely do you suspect, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes looked at him. Nothing in his face altered. "Yet The room seemed suddenly colder. "I suspect," said he quietly, "that Sir Julian Markham was a man who distrusted illness." Miss Markham looked startled. Ashdown remained motionless. "And why?" asked the physician. "Would you think so?" Holmes reached toward the desk, not for the letter, but for the inkstand beside it. He lifted it lightly. Beneath the base lay a narrow crescent of moisture, fresh, still dark upon the wood. Holmes set the inkstand down again. "Because," said he, "a dying man seldom rearranges his writing table after death." No one spoke. Then Holmes turned toward Ashdown, and for the first time that evening the physician's composure wavered, only slightly, but enough. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, doctor," his voice had become almost conversational, "when exactly did you last touch this desk?" Dr. Ashdown did not answer at once. The question, though delivered in Holmes's mildest tone, appeared to strike him with singular force. His hand, still occupied with the fastening of his glove, paused, only for a moment. But Holmes, whose observations miss little and forgive less, had already seen enough. "I fail to understand the relevance," said the physician at length. Holmes leaned lightly against the mantel. "That is unfortunate. I had hoped you might improve my understanding." Ashdown's expression hardened, almost imperceptibly. "I touched the desk this afternoon, Mr. Holmes, precisely as I told you. And the inkstand, if I moved it, I have no recollection." Holmes inclined his head. "A physician's memory is ordinarily dependable. I had no reason to study the placement of household objects." "No?" Holmes crossed once more toward the desk. The rest of us watched him in silence. He lifted the silver inkstand carefully between thumb and forefinger, and held it nearer the lamp. The base carried a narrow ring of moisture, fresh, recent, and beneath, where it had rested, the polished surface of the desk remained distinctly darker than the surrounding wood. Holmes returned it gently to its place. "Curious," he murmured. Ashdown's voice cooled. "You seem greatly interested in condensation." "I am interested," Holmes replied, "in phrenology." He turned toward Miss Markham. "This room has remained unheated since Sir Julian's death." "Yes. I ordered the fire extinguished after the funeral, and the windows closed." Holmes nodded. "Then moisture should settle evenly." I confess that his meaning escaped me until he continued, "Yet, observe, Watson, the dust lies undisturbed upon the desk, save beneath the inkstand, and along this narrow line beside it," he pointed. "There, scarcely visible in the lamp glow, ran the faint impression of recent movement. Something had been slid or lifted." Harbury stepped nearer. Good heavens! Ashdown remained perfectly upright. "But I saw the muscle tighten once along his jaw." Holmes's voice stayed pleasant. "You visited this chambers today?" "I did. For notes, yes. And while here you handled the desk." "I may have." "You moved the inkstand?" "If so, unintentionally." Holmes looked thoughtfully at him. "Of course." The physician folded his arms. "Fools, if this examination is meant to imply misconduct, I should advise greater precision." "My dear doctor," said Holmes, "precision is precisely what occupies me. The silence that followed was interrupted only by the ticking of the carriage clock upon the mantel. It seemed unusually loud, steady, insistent. Holmes turned suddenly toward Miss Markham. "Did your uncle correspond frequently?" She looked surprised. "Very frequently. Where did he keep his papers?" "In the library below." "And private correspondence?" She hesitated. "Usually locked." "Locked where?" "In his escritoire." Holmes glanced toward the desk. "This one?" "Yes." "Was it opened after death?" "No." Harbury cleared his throat. "The keys passed directly to me. I sealed his study records myself." Holmes looked interested. "You possess them still?" "I do." "Excellent." Ashdown spoke sharply. "This is becoming absurd." We all turned. The physician had lost some portion of his earlier composure. Not dramatically, yet enough that his calm now appeared maintained by effort rather than habit. "You have been here scarcely 20 minutes," said he, "and already you treat a household in mourning as though it were a dockside inquiry." Holmes regarded him quietly. "And you object?" "I object to theatrics." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then we are allied, Doctor." Ashdown's eyes narrowed. "There is no mystery here. Sir Julian died of long-standing cardiac disease. I attended him personally. The symptoms were consistent. The examination was thorough." "Was it?" The question hung softly in the room. Miss Markham looked from one man to the other. Harbury visibly wished himself elsewhere. Ashdown's face grew still. "You doubt my competence." "I doubt certainty," Holmes answered. The physician drew a measured breath. "I have practiced medicine 25 years, and I," said Holmes, "have observed human error somewhat longer." Ashdown stepped forward. "Are you accusing me of negligence?" Holmes shook his head. "Not at all." The doctor's shoulders eased slightly. Then Holmes added, "I merely wonder whether you are mistaken or frightened." The effect was immediate. A faint colour rose beneath Ashdown's pale complexion. "Sir, you returned to this room today," Holmes continued calmly. "You handled objects upon the desk. You appear singularly uneasy regarding a dead man's papers, and now, when no accusation has yet been made, you rushed to defend conclusions nobody challenged." Ashdown's voice sharpened. "This is intolerable." "And yet," said Holmes, "still interesting." The physician turned toward Miss Markham. "I shall not remain to be insulted." But before he could move, Holmes spoke again. "One last question." Ashdown stopped. Holmes's gaze rested upon him with unsettling steadiness. "When you certified Sir Julian's death, did you examine his hands?" The doctor looked genuinely taken aback. "My pardon? His hands? What possible significance? Humour me." Ashdown hesitated. Then, "No." The answer seemed to satisfy Holmes more than I understood. "Thank you," said he softly. The physician drew himself up. "If that is all, almost." Holmes moved toward the writing desk. Once more, he rested one hand lightly upon its polished surface. Then, with sudden motion, pressed inward against the carved panel beneath the drawers. A sharp click sounded. Miss Markham gasped. A concealed compartment slid open. Inside lay only a single object, a worn blue ledger, and upon seeing it, Dr. Ashdown went utterly pale. For several seconds after the hidden compartment sprang open, no one in that chamber spoke. The little blue ledger rested within its recess, like some long-buried relic reluctantly surrendered to daylight. Holmes alone moved. He drew it out with the utmost care, and turned it once beneath the lamplight. It was an ordinary volume in appearance. Blue calf binding, worn at the corners, brass clasp, tarnished with age, and upon the spine no title whatsoever. Yet the effect it produced upon Dr. Ashdown was extraordinary. The physician had gone markedly pale, not with theatrical alarm, nor even anger, rather with that involuntary disturbance which comes when a man sees unexpectedly revealed something he had believed concealed. Holmes noticed it instantly. His eyes lifted from the book. "Ah," said he softly, "you recognize it." Ashdown recovered himself with visible effort. "I recognize nothing except an invasion of privacy." Holmes turned the ledger thoughtfully in his fingers. "And yet your pulse has altered." The doctor's mouth hardened. "You presume much." "I observe more." Miss Markham stepped nearer. "I have never seen that book before." "No," Holmes replied. She shook her head. "My uncle kept business records downstairs, and secret records," said Holmes, "appear to have remained upstairs." Harbury adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Good Lord! Sir Julian truly hid it." "So it would seem." Ashdown moved toward the door. "If you are satisfied with your theatrics, I shall take my leave." Holmes did not even glance at him. "You are in some haste, Doctor. I have patience, and perhaps concerns." Ashdown stopped. "You overestimate your cleverness, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled faintly, a common accusation. The physician's gaze settled upon the ledger. "If Sir Julian concealed private papers, that is scarcely evidence of wrongdoing." "Quite true. Then I fail to see why my presence is required." Holmes finally looked up. "Because," said he pleasantly, "I have not yet determined whether you are witness, accomplice, or victim." The room grew still. Ashdown's face flushed with restrained indignation. "This is intolerable. And yet you remain." For one tense moment, I thought the physician might simply depart. Indeed, he half turned toward the corridor. Then Holmes unclasped the ledger, and Ashdown stopped. It was the smallest movement, barely perceptible, but it told Holmes everything. He seated himself beside the lamp. "Watson," said he, "kindly note that our doctor dislikes surprises." First pages contained ordinary entries, dates, payments, investments. Sir Julian's handwriting appeared throughout. Firm, disciplined, unmistakable. Harbury leaned over Holmes's shoulder. "Estate notes." "Partly," Holmes murmured. He turned several pages. The scratching of paper sounded unnaturally loud. Then his expression altered. Not surprise, recognition. "Interesting. What is it?" I asked. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he read further, and I, standing behind him, caught scattered lines. October 3rd. Ashdown insists condition worsening, symptoms inconsistent. Another page. October 11th. Medicine altered again. Drowsiness increased. Then October 18th. I distrust certainty where death is concerned. must continue observations privately. Miss Markham drew a quiet breath. My uncle wrote that. So he did. Ashdown's voice cut sharply through the room. Personal reflections, nothing more. Holmes looked up. Perhaps. He continued turning pages, and then suddenly stopped. The silence lengthened. I saw his eyes narrow. Harbury shifted anxiously. What have you found? Holmes read aloud. Ashdown insists condition terminal within weeks. I remain unconvinced. Strange disagreement regarding dosage. Shall seek second opinion, if strength permits. Miss Markham stared. A second opinion? Ashdown spoke at once. Sir Julian was a difficult patient, suspicious by temperament. Holmes ignored him. Another page, then another. The ledger grew increasingly irregular. Medical notes mingled with observations, times, names, fragments. At last, Holmes read, November 7th, conversation overheard between Mercer and A. Cannot yet determine allegiance. One serves necessity, the other fear. Mercer, who had entered unnoticed, now stood near the doorway with tea upon a tray, nearly dropped it. His face lost colour. Holmes looked up. Ah, Mr. Mercer. Your timing is admirable, the butler swallowed. I beg pardon, sir. Holmes watched him closely. Did you know of this ledger? No, sir. Did Sir Julian confide in you? No more than household matters. Holmes's gaze lingered. Mercer lowered his eyes. Then Holmes turned another page, and for the first time that evening, Sherlock Holmes grew very still. The entry occupied only 3 lines. He read them once, then again. Finally, he handed the ledger to me. The words were written more heavily than the rest, as though pressed into the paper with unusual force. I read, November 8th. If my fears are correct, I may already be living among conspirators. Should death come suddenly, trust neither physician nor verdict. The evidence lied beneath the clock. No one spoke. The ticking of the carriage clock upon the mantel suddenly seemed deafening. And then Holmes did something I had not anticipated. He rose, not toward the desk, but toward the clock, his eyes fixed upon it with sudden intensity. And behind us, very softly, Ashdown whispered, Do not. Dr. Ashdown's voice had been scarcely louder than the breath, yet in the silence of that chamber it carried with startling clarity. Do not. Holmes stopped, not because the warning restrained him, but because it interested him. Slowly he turned. Her physician stood near the doorway, one gloved hand resting against the frame. Though his expression remained outwardly composed, something had altered beneath the surface. The careful professional calm who had observed since his arrival now appeared maintained only by deliberate effort. Holmes regarded him thoughtfully. A curious objection to Dr. Ashdown straightened. I object only to vandalism. The cock appears sturdy enough to survive inquiry. It belonged to Sir Julian. Then we may trust it to speak honestly of him. The carriage clock stood upon the mantel between 2 silver candlesticks, its brass case polished to mirror brightness. The ticking, which moments earlier had seemed merely noticeable, now filled the room with unnatural insistence. Miss Markham looked uncertain. My uncle wound that clock himself every evening. Without fail? Holmes asked. Yes. Holmes approached it slowly. The physician took an involuntary half-step forward. I saw Holmes notice. So did Ashdown. For an instant, their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, it passed something difficult to describe. A contest not of temper, but of concealment. Holmes lifted the clock. It was heavier than its size suggested. He turned it carefully in his hands. Interesting. What do you see? I asked. Not what I see, Watson. What I fail to see. He angled the brass case toward the lamp. The dust. I looked. The mantle bore a faint settled film, disturbed only beneath the clock itself. But surely the rear panel, Holmes said quietly. I leaned nearer. The back plate carried several small scratches around the fastening screws, recent scratches, bright against older tarnish. Holmes glanced toward Miss Markham. When was this clock last cleaned? She shook her head. I do not know. Servants? Mercer cleared his throat. Not these last weeks, sir. Holmes nodded. Yet somebody opened it. Ashdown spoke sharply. This is absurd. Holmes did not look up. Possibly. He produced a slender pocket knife and inserted the blade delicately along the panel seam. The doctor stepped forward. I must insist. You have insisted admirably all evening, Holmes replied. Permit me now the same privilege. A soft metallic click sounded. The rear panel loosened. Inside, instead of exposed gears alone, lay a narrow compartment, cleverly fashioned within the casing. Miss Markham gasped. Harbury uttered a startled oath, and from Ashdown came no sound at all. Holmes reached within. His fingers withdrew. Not papers, but a small oilskin packet, tied with black thread. The room seemed to contract around it. Holmes laid the packet upon the writing desk. No one moved. The rain whispered faintly against the windows. Then, with deliberate care, he untied the cord. Inside lay 3 objects. First, a folded sheet of paper. Second, a small brass key. And third, a glass medicine vial. The effect upon Dr. Ashdown was immediate. His face drained of colour. Holmes picked up the vial. It was nearly empty. No label remained. Only a faint residue clung to the glass. A curious hiding place for medicine, I remarked. Indeed. Holmes passed it to me. Your opinion, Watson. I uncorked it cautiously. A faint scent escaped. Not strong, but familiar. I frowned. There is something medicinal here, though degraded. Holmes unfolded the paper. His eyes moved swiftly across it. Then he became very still. Harbury spoke first. What is it? Holmes handed me the page. It proved to be a prescription record, dated, signed, and bearing Ashdown's name. I read aloud, mixture altered by instruction. Night dosage increased. Patient not informed of revision. Observed sedation and weakness. Below appeared several figures and chemical abbreviations unfamiliar to me, but one phrase stood unmistakably clear, not for household record. Miss Markham looked horrified. Ashdown The physician's voice came cold and controlled. You misunderstand. Holmes raised an eyebrow. I wonder whether we do. Ashdown stepped nearer. That document proves nothing. Perhaps not. Holmes lifted the brass key. But conspiracies grow untidy when accompanied by hidden compartments. The doctor's composure cracked. This is outrageous. His voice rang suddenly through the chamber. Mercer visibly flinched, and it was then, at the very sound of that anger, that Holmes's expression changed, only slightly, but enough. He looked not at Ashdown, but at Mercer. The butler stood frozen beside the tea-tray, pale as old paper. Holmes watched him quietly, then said, Mr. Mercer, I believe you have been frightened for some time. Mercer stared. No, sir. No. Holmes's voice softened. Sir Julian wrote that one man in this house served fear rather than guilt. The old butler's hands began to tremble. Ashdown spoke sharply. Holmes. But Holmes raised a hand. Be careful, doctor. The physician stopped, and for the first time that evening, Mercer looked not toward Miss Markham, but toward Dr. Ashdown. It lasted only a second, yet in that second I saw something unmistakable, not loyalty, not respect, fear. Then Mercer whispered, Sir, I did not know he would die, and the tea-tray slipped from his hands and shattered across the floor. The crash of shattered porcelain rang violently through the chamber. Tea spread across the carpet in dark steaming pools, while fragments of china spun and settled at Mercer's feet. No one moved. The old butler stood rigid, his hands trembling uncontrollably, his face drained of what little colour remained. Holmes regarded him steadily. You would not know, said he quietly, that who would die. Mercer's mouth worked soundlessly. Ashdown spoke first. This has gone far enough. His voice had regained some measure of firmness, yet beneath it lay a tension impossible now to conceal. Mercer looked toward him, and again I saw it. Fear, raw and unmistakable. Holmes saw it too. He stepped between them. I think, said he, we shall hear Mercer before deciding what has gone far enough. The butler swallowed painfully. I never meant harm, sir. Then sit. Mercer lowered himself weakly into a chair. Miss Markham stood motionless near the hearth, one hand pressed against her throat. Mercer, she said softly, what is this? The old servant avoided her eyes. Holmes remained standing. His long fingers rested lightly upon the blue ledger. You served Sir Julian how long? 23 years, sir. A faithful service. I tried to be. Holmes inclined his head. And yet Sir Julian suspected divided loyalties. Mercer shut his eyes. Ashdown stepped forward. I object to this examination. Holmes did not even glance at him. You may object after the truth arrives. The physician's jaw tightened. Holmes turned again to Mercer. The note within the ledger states that one man in this house feared the truth more than guilt itself. Mercer whispered. Yes, you? The old man nodded. Miss Markham looked stricken. Mercer, surely not. I am sorry, miss. The words came out broken. So very sorry. Holmes's tone softened. You assisted Dr. Ashdown? No. The denial emerged instantly, too instantly. Holmes noticed. So you fear him, but do not serve him. Mercer looked helplessly toward the physician. Ashdown's face had become unreadable. The silence stretched. Then Holmes said, "Let us begin simply. On the night Sir Julian died, who entered this room?" Mercer hesitated. "No one, sir." Holmes waited. The old servant's shoulders sagged. Then, "No one, except Dr. Ashdown." Miss Markham stared. Ashdown's voice cut sharply across the room. "I attended my patient." "At what hour?" Holmes asked. "Near midnight." Mercer shook his head. "It were later." The physician turned. "You presume much?" "I heard the clock, sir." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "The clock?" Mercer nodded nervously. "The carriage clock. Sir Julian wound it every evening at 11. That night I heard it again." The room grew still. "A second winding?" Holmes asked. "Yes, sir." "At what time?" "Past 1. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. "Interesting. Very interesting." "And why does that matter?" Ashdown said coldly. Holmes ignored him. "Continue, Mercer." The old man wrung his hands. "I had gone down to secure the kitchen door. Dr. Ashdown arrived late. Said Sir Julian had taken ill, and had he?" Mercer hesitated. I cannot say." "Did you see Sir Julian alive?" "No." "Did you enter?" "No, sir." Holmes's gaze narrowed. "Yet you heard voices." Mercer looked miserable. "Yes." "How many?" The answer came scarcely above a whisper. 2. Miss Markham stared. 2. Mercer nodded. "I heard Sir Julian speaking." Harbury visibly started. "But that is impossible." "I heard him, sir." Holmes leaned slightly closer. "What did he say?" Mercer swallowed. "I could not hear all of it." "Try." The butler closed his eyes. "There was arguing." "Between Sir Julian and Ashdown?" "Yes." "Over what?" "I do not know." Holmes's voice remained calm. "Did you hear particular words?" Mercer hesitated. Then, "medicine." Ashdown's face hardened. "And ledger." Holmes became very still. "And?" The old servant looked toward the floor. "One more thing." Holmes waited. Mercer's voice shook. Sir Julian said, "You mistake weakness for surrender." No one spoke. Outside, rain drifted softly against the windows. Then Holmes asked, "And after?" Mercer looked ill. The voices stopped. "How long?" 10 minutes, perhaps. "And then?" The old man's hands trembled violently. "I heard the bell." "What bell?" "The bedside bell, sir." Miss Markham drew a sharp breath. "But the cord was found beside the bed." Mercer nodded miserably. "I know." Holmes's eyes remained fixed upon him. "You entered, then?" "No." "Why not?" Mercer looked suddenly ashamed. "Because—" His voice failed. Holmes finished gently. "Because Dr. Ashdown told you not to." The butler's silence answered. Ashdown stepped forward. "This is intolerable." Holmes turned at last. "Is it false?" The physician's face remained controlled. "I instructed the servants not to disturb a dying man. A convenient instruction. He was gravely ill." "According to whom?" "I was his physician." Holmes folded his arms. "And after the bell?" he asked Mercer. The butler looked trapped. "I waited." "How long?" "Perhaps 15 minutes." "And then?" Mercer whispered. "Dr. Ashdown came downstairs." "Alone?" The old man nodded. "And Sir Julian?" Mercer's eyes filled suddenly with distress. "He said it was finished." Silence. Holmes looked toward the medicine vial lying upon the desk, then toward the prescription note, then slowly toward Dr. Ashdown. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, still polite, still calm, but colder. "Doctor," said Sherlock Holmes, "I begin to suspect that Sir Julian Markham died somewhat differently than you reported." And for the first time, Dr. Lionel Ashdown looked genuinely afraid. Dr. Ashdown's fear, once glimpsed, vanished almost immediately beneath a practiced composure. He drew himself upright. "You build castles from shadows, Mr. Holmes." Holmes stood beside the desk, one hand resting lightly upon the blue ledger. "On the contrary," said he quietly, "I dismantle them." The physician folded his arms. "You possess no proof of murder?" "Not yet," Holmes replied, "though we approach it rapidly." Miss Markham looked pale. "Holmes, you truly believe my uncle was killed?" Holmes regarded her with unusual gentleness. "I believe Sir Julian expected death sooner than nature intended." He crossed toward the window. Outside, Bloomsbury lay dim beneath drifting rain and wavering gaslight. "Let us review matters plainly," said he. "No mystery survives orderly thought." He turned. "Sir Julian distrusts his position and records that distrust privately. He conceals evidence sniff for. He warns us against Dr. Ashdown. A second letter appears after death. A prescription hidden from household record alters medication without patient knowledge. And finally, his eyes settled upon Mercer. A servant hears argument, and a bedside bell before death is declared. Ashdown laughed softly. Circumstance, nothing more. Holmes inclined his head. "Perhaps." The physician stepped nearer. "You forget one detail. Sir Julian suffered genuine illness." "I do not forget it." "Then heart failure remains entirely plausible." Holmes smiled faintly. "Ah, but plausible is not identical with truthful." He lifted the nearly empty medicine vial. "Watson?" "I accepted it. You requested my opinion earlier." "And now I request it formally." I uncorked the bottle again and inhaled carefully. The bitter odor remained faint but distinct. Holmes watched me closely. "Well," I hesitated, "there is something sedative here. More specifically." I frowned. "The residue is degraded, yet I believe." Then suddenly I knew. I looked up. "Chloral hydrate." Miss Markham stared. "A sleeping draught?" "In moderate quantity," said I slowly. "Yes." Holmes nodded. "And in excessive quantity?" I looked toward Ashdown. The answer formed unwillingly. "Respiratory depression, weak pulse, collapse, particularly dangerous in a weakened heart." The room fell silent. Ashdown's voice remained steady. "Chloral's common treatment." "Indeed," Holmes said, "which is why murder by medicine is so obliging. The poison hides within prescription." The physician's expression hardened. "You accuse me of poisoning my patient." "I accuse no one yet." Holmes set down the vial. Then he picked up the brass key. "But this interests me." He turned toward Harbury. "Sir Julian maintains secure papers." "Yes." "Locked where?" "In the library safe." Holmes held up the key. "Then we shall examine it." Ashdown moved instantly. "There is no need." Holmes looked at him, and the doctor stopped. The library lay below. It proved a solemn chamber, lined with dark shelves and smelling faintly of tobacco and leather. Harbury led us to a narrow iron safe concealed behind law books. The brass key fitted perfectly. Inside lay bonds, deeds, correspondence, and a sealed packet marked "To be opened only upon my death." Harbury looked astonished. "I never knew." "Open it," said Holmes. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Within rested several papers, medical correspondence, and one signed affidavit. Harbury read aloud, then stopped, his face drained of colour. "What is it?" Miss Markham whispered. He swallowed. "It concerns Ashdown." The physician stepped forward. "This is unlawful." Holmes took the affidavit. It bore Sir Julian's signature, and beneath it the signature of another physician. Holmes read calmly, "I, Sir Julian Markham, believing my treatment improperly altered, and fearing concealment of medical fact, have sought independent examination from Dr. Nathaniel Breckenridge." Miss Markham gasped. Harbury stared. Holmes continued, "Whose findings contradict those of Dr. Lionel Ashdown, and indicate no immediate terminal decline." The silence that followed seemed endless. Then Holmes lowered the page. "You see, Doctor," said he softly, "your difficulty is not merely medicine." Ashdown stood motionless. "You were contradicted." No answer. Holmes went on. "Sir Julian discovered it. He suspected manipulation. He recorded his fears and concealed evidence. You learned this, perhaps, during your final argument, and altered more than dosage that night." The physician's composure finally broke. "This is madness, is it?" Holmes's eyes hardened. "You increased chloral beyond necessity." The patient weakened. "When alarm followed, you declare inevitable decline. You cannot prove. The bell proves it." Ashdown stopped. Holmes spoke coldly now. A dying man rang for help. No one moved. "You forbade servants to enter because he was not yet dead when Mercer heard that bell." Mercer lowered his head. Holmes continued, "You remained. You waited. And when death came, you rearranged certainty around it." Miss Markham looked stricken. "Why?" Ashdown's breathing had grown uneven. Holmes answered before he could. "Because Sir Julian intended to expose him." The physician laughed once, thin and bitter. "You know nothing. Then enlighten us." For a long moment, Ashdown said nothing. Then, very quietly, "He would have ruined me." No one spoke. The doctor's shoulders sagged. "There were debts," he said, "speculations. I altered records only to gain time, nothing more. But he discovered discrepancies, threatened inquiry." Miss Markham stared in horror. "So you killed him?" Ashdown closed his eyes. "I meant only to quiet him." The confession fell softly into the room, like something exhausted at last. Holmes looked toward the fire. "And the letters?" The physician opened his eyes. "I found the first among his papers. He had written warnings, perhaps anticipating death. I tried to retrieve them, and the second." Ashdown looked toward the ceiling. "I resealed it. intended to remove it later. Holmes nodded. The second burial. Harbury frowned. Holmes's voice grew quiet. Not of the body. He looked at the blue ledger. The burial of truth. No one spoke after that. Outside, the rain had begun to ease, and as Inspector Lestrade was summoned, I remembered glancing toward the carriage clock upon the mantel. Its steady ticking filled the room. Sir Julian Markham, though buried already, had refused to let the truth be buried with him.